After reading the statements, one thing becomes clear. It is that statements B and D would follow A. Now, B and D could be in any order. They may or may not be consecutive statements, but A talks about the dispute settlement body. B and D then refer to this as the DSB. So we have these two statements coming after A. Let's start our sequence with A. Let's place it here. We don't know if any other statements come before this, but B and D, or rather C might come before this, but B and D come after this. So let's represent it in this manner. We have A, and then after that, we have B and D in any order. Let's represent that with a bracket. They don't necessarily need to be consecutive statements as well. Now we have two floaters here. The first one is C, because C doesn't refer to the DSB at all. So we are not sure where it stands in the context of these statements. The second one is B. Once we've read all the statements, we'll realize that B talks about the functioning of, or rather the authority which is given to the DSB. So we are not sure where exactly it connects. Let's look at C first. C is a floater, but can be handled easily. C tells us, with respect to disputes arising under a covered agreement, which is a plurilateral trade agreement, the term member, as used herein, shall refer only to those members that are parties to the relevant PTA. Once we have that, we see that this introduces the aspect of PTA, plurilateral trade agreement, and also the term member. It defines member in a certain context. In this particular scenario, with relevance to this particular body, it defines members. And this, we find, immediately connects with D. So D tells us where the DSB administers the dispute settlements provisions of a plurilateral trade agreement. So this is talking about the PTA, which we see in statement C as well. Only those members that are parties to the agreement may participate in decisions or actions taken by DSB with respect to that dispute. Now, if we sift through all of that language, all of that verbosity, we find that first it talks about the PTA, a PTA, and it also talks about members. Both of these aspects, they continue the argument in C, because C tells us under a covered agreement, which is a plurilateral trade agreement, the term member is defined as, or the term member is used herein, shall refer only to. And we talk about only those members, which is a continuation of this idea. So we find that C and D form a pair and D comes after A. So let's place C and D here. After A. C also comes after A because C immediately connects with D. C is the statement immediately preceding D. Now we have to check for B and A. Let's first quickly look at A, because we've already understood that A is before C and D. We are not sure about B. B could be before A or in between A and CD or after D. But in any ways, or rather, B cannot be before A because we have seen how the statement mentions DSB. So we could have, now let's remove this. We have worked out D. We could have B either here. It cannot be before A. We've seen why. Refers to the DSB, the dispute settlement body, in abbreviation. So B could be here in between A and CD, or B could be here. Let's take a look at A first. Let's clear these out. A says the dispute settlement body is hereby established to administer these rules and procedures and except as otherwise provided. in a covered agreement the consultation and dispute settlement provisions of the covered agreements. Now, if you look at statement B, we find that it says, accordingly, the DSB shall have authority to establish panels, adopt panels, appellate and appellate body reports, panel and appellate body reports, maintain surveillance of implementations of rulings and recommendations, and authorize suspension of concessions. So we find here that this is a much more direct connect with A, because it talks in general about the DCB, that the DSB shall have the authority to do something. We see that A mentions the dispute settlement body is hereby established to administer these rules and procedures. So B has a much better connection with A than with D, because D talks about where the DSB administrates the dispute settlements provisions of a plurilateral trade agreement. Only those members that are parties to the agreement may participate in decisions or actions taken by DSB with respect to that dispute. So this is specifically about members. Members has been introduced here. We see that this gives us a sort of an idea which is repeated in B. So if we had the order as, let's say, DB, then we would actually be reiterating ourselves in two consecutive statements. D would say where the DSB administrates the dispute settlements provisions of a PTA, only those members that are parties to the agreement may participate in decisions or actions taken by DSB with respect to that dispute. B says, accordingly, the DSB shall have the authority to establish panels, adopt panel and appellate body reports, maintain surveillance of implementation of rulings and recommendations. But these, as the word accordingly suggests, cannot be a conclusion from D, because it sets, D says that only those members that are parties to the agreement may participate in decisions or actions taken by DSB. So yet again, we have a bit of a repeat of ideas between B and D. So putting D and B together, as in this choice, is a bad idea. Thus, B cannot be here. We've also seen how B cannot be at the beginning of the sequence because A must precede B. That means B has to be over here between A and CD. So we find that B comes in as the second statement in the sequence, and then we have the pair CD. That gives us the answer as A, B, C, D.